Adventures in Education, a program that spotlights positive things happening in the world of education in Southern Oregon and Northern California. I'm John Letts. Today we have a program, I guess, or an organization, I should say, that is conserving some very special places in our area. And the education piece of this is getting that stewardship piece in place for the next generation. The organization I'm talking about is Southern Oregon Land Conservancy. And today I have I want to make sure the title's correct here, the Stewardship Director of that program. And this is Christy Mergenthaler. Christy, welcome to Adventures in Education.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. I really, just as kind of background, I know you're very busy with all these activities, and gosh, I think a year ago was the first time I suggested coming on the program, and we finally got together, so I do appreciate you being here, for sure.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, so in your position, you carry on the educational piece of the program, and we're going to dig into that whole education piece for most of the program. But first, I'd like you to explain to our viewers, what is Southern Oregon Land Conservancy, and what's their main mission? What are they about?
Sure. Southern Oregon Land Conservancy is the local land trust. So we're into land conservation, protecting the beautiful lands in Southwest Oregon. We particularly focus on the Rogue Basin in Jackson and Josephine County, and we've conserved about 10,000 acres in this region.
Wow, 10,000 acres.
Yeah, there's this beautiful term, solastalgia, and it describes the heartbreak that almost all of us have experienced of losing places, farms, open spaces, places we played when we were kids, and they're altered and overdeveloped. And that heartbreak of losing these places that feel like a part of ourselves. So part of our role is to try to halt that a little bit. You know, Southwest Oregon is gorgeous, and people will continue to move here. And
for that gorgeous
absolutely.
Land.
And we want to conserve a little bit of that landscape. The farms, the ranches, the forests, the streams, the wildlife habitat. And so that's our mission. We love land, and we work cooperatively with landowners and other groups to protect land.
Well, it's, I guess it's kind of an echo of what you just said, but we live in such a special area, and we have such beauty here. I'm very happy, and I should say in the spirit of disclosure, I'm a member of your organization.
Thank you, John.
And I was so happy to join this organization because of the same thing that was just said. I mean, we have this beautiful area that I discovered as soon as I moved here, and there are pressures that can take this special beauty away. And you end up with a concrete jungle, and we do not want that in Oregon. And I think we speak for a lot of people who have the same thing. Let's look at some of these areas that have been preserved.
Sure.
So let's start with this first one. This will be our first still.
Right.
And this looks like a farm. So can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so we use two tools to protect land. And one of them is a great tool to protect private land. It's called a conservation agreement or a conservation easement. So it's especially good at helping protect working lands like farms and ranches. And this is an example of C2 Ranch, a gorgeous, big, giant ranch. In fact, one of the biggest ranches in Jackson County. And so the land is worked, cows move around and graze, but the land can't be overdeveloped and converted into a housing subdivision. It always will be ranch land and wildlife habitat.
And how do the ranch owners, what's their role in this?
Right, well, usually farmers and ranchers come to us because they love their land. They want to protect the farming legacy in our region. And they've seen other farms gobbled up by development. Not that development is necessarily bad, but we also value our food security in this region. So they want to protect the land they love and to see that there's future farming and ranching in the future.
Sounds like a real win-win.
It is, it is.
Let's take a look at another special area here.
Sure, well, here's a beautiful, sweet little farm in the north part of Ashland. It's called Eagle Mill Farm. And this picture shows one of the wonderful owners, Ron Roth, overlooking his property, which also includes Bear Creek. One of Ron's visions is he always wants children to come to the farm in the fall and get a free pumpkin.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
They love that.
Absolutely.
Now, I have seen this because it's right along that bike trail, the
yeah.
Greenway, and I've always appreciated being able to look out there and not see a bunch of new condos.
Yes.
And be able to see this beautiful farm.
Yeah,
that's
that
there.
rich, beautiful soil cannot be paved over.
Good. Excellent. So let's go on to the next one. And what are we looking at here?
Oh, this is a wonderful owl. It's called the great gray owl. It's both great and gray, and it's declining. However, there are many places still around where we live, including many of our protected lands, that support great gray habitat.
Okay, great. And let's go ahead and go on to the next one. This is a flower, but I bet it has a story.
This is elephant heads. And you can imagine why it might be called elephant heads. And this is a protected property up on Howard Prairie that has wet meadows and working forests and also great gray owls.
Okay. And those working forests, I mean, people tend to think of conserving as locking away.
Yeah.
But it's a different approach, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, and especially conservation easements. They're not locking the land. So people can harvest trees they can't clear cut. And there's sort of provisions to make sure the harvests are sustainable so that there will be forests 100 years from now.
And you know, if that model of forestry continues or really takes off, really takes root, we're going to see a real different future than we've seen in the past of these huge areas of clear cut are going to not be the norm anymore.
Absolutely.
Let's see another one. And this is one of the areas obviously taken in the fall, beautiful place.
Isn't that beautiful? We have a number of protected properties along the Siskiyou Summit. This is actually a beautiful wet meadow adjacent to another working forest.
Okay. And what is this one called?
This one actually is called Old Siskiyou Sheep Trail because in the early 1900s, hundreds and hundreds of sheep would go up the Siskiyou Summit up to Mount Ashland and the Siskiyous.
Oh, really?
So the name refers to the historical trail.
That's part of history I was unaware of.
Right, and the Siskiyou Summit area is well known too because it's the land bridge between the Cascades and the Siskiyou Mountains, and is very important ecologically as a bridge for wildlife movement and for genetics and plants to move.
And we have part of that protected
Absolutely.
now. That's great. Let's see the next one.
Oh, of course, we also protect other
now wait a
wildlife
minute.
habitat. So here's a picture of a special mammal that a lot of people don't know about. It's called the Pacific fisher. And here it's actually being radio collared. And this sweet little fisher actually
looks like a teddy bear.
yeah, just a slightly fierce teddy bear.
Oh, you don't want to, they don't want to hug from you.
Yeah, and mostly they spend a lot of time up in the trees, but this particular one was radio collared in Siskiyou Mountain Park up above Ashland, which is a protected property that Southern Land Conservancy is involved with.
Wow, so you guys see some exciting things on these protected lands.
Oh, yes.
Let's see the next one.
Here is a picture of a property that we're working on conserving. This beautiful flowery meadow is at Rogue River Preserve, a gorgeous piece of property that we're in the process of acquiring along the Rogue River. It includes about 2 miles of riverfront and outstanding, outstanding habitat.
Wow, it sure looks that way. What is the history of this property?
This property has been lightly used for a long time. Actually, a family still owns it, the MacArthur family, and originally it was bought by Robert Rule, who was the Mail Tribune editor and a Pulitzer Prize winner. And his family used this property as a summer retreat. There's a historical lodge on the property. And it's been lightly grazed, but overall what it represents is sort of remnant wild valley floor. It's 152 acres with oak woodlands and elk and bear and spawning giant Chinook salmon.
Chinook salmon,
Yeah.
great. Well, that's fantastic. Let's see the
There's
next
another
one.
picture.
I doubt if we can top it, but here's the river itself.
Yes, so the property supports over 2 miles of riverfront. Great habitat for fish and otter and beaver, and sometimes we even see the elk hanging out in that section of the river.
Wow, so a truly wild place here, right in our backyard.
Absolutely.
Let's see the next one.
Oh, here's a picture of a very special habitat, oak woodlands, oak savannas.
We keep hearing more about that.
Yeah, and we're fortunate here in Southwest Oregon, we still have some left. You go to other places, say for instance, Washington. In the state of Washington, western gray squirrels, which need these oaks, are endangered because they've cut down most of the oak trees. Here in Southwest Oregon, we still have a few. So protecting oak woodlands and savannas, primarily on private land using this tool, conservation easements, is one of our main priorities.
I had a guest on an earlier show, and I suggested, well, maybe instead of the Douglas fir tree being our state symbol, we should have the oak tree. And boy, did he agree.
And you know,
with that statement.
this particular oak tree is called Oregon white oak, so all the better.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what's next.
Other wildlife habitat we protect, of course, are for snakes and amphibians. This particular snake is a beautiful black and white snake that most of us haven't seen. It's called the common king snake, but it's one of the least common snakes you find in Oregon because its habitat is being destroyed.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, in my biology class from many years ago, king snakes, their prey is the rattlesnake.
You are very right.
And if they get bit by a rattlesnake, it doesn't affect them.
No, they are tougher than we are.
Yeah, well, that's great that they're getting a lease on life through protection. Let's see the next one.
So here's an example of a wonderful farm and also educational center, but of course a very charming goat. This is
he had to get his picture taken.
Yeah, this is White Oak Farm outside of Williams. It's a community organic farm, and they have farm programs out there. And we protect this property with a conservation easement. It has natural areas and but some very compelling animals on the farm.
So they get to keep farming and they get to keep those animals.
Absolutely.
And yet it's protected. It's not going to end up being, I hate to pick on condominiums because some people live in them, but it's a matter of place, right? I mean,
sure.
Everything has its place, and thank goodness we're still going to have places like this. Let's see the next one.
Here is a property we own on Williams Creek. It's a dense, complicated, messy floodplain forest, and particularly, and now we're jumping to cobra lily fen, full of rare plants in Josephine County, a little bit outside of the Illinois Valley. This is a property we call Woodcock Mountain, and it hosts some federally endangered plants and rare plants and a lot of beauty.
Now, those plants only grow in certain types of soils, isn't that right? You can't have them growing just anywhere.
No, they're hard to cultivate. They particularly like a type of habitat called fens, or they sometimes are called bogs. But so they're soils with low nutrients, and the cobra lilies get some extra nutrients from the insects they catch in their hoods.
Cool.
Yeah.
They're fun plants. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And you know, they have a place to be now. Now, what are we looking at here?
Well, some of you might have seen this. This is sort of the iconic wood house if you're driving north of Eagle Point.
Oh, everyone's seen that
right.
if they've gone up Highway 62.
And it has an example of really great views. You have the fields, the historical house, and Mount McLaughlin behind it. The property, we call the Woodhouse property, also protects a really rare land type called the agate desert, which it consists of vernal pools and mounded prairies and federally listed vernal pool fairy shrimp.
I was going to say, when I hear vernal pools, that's what I think of.
Oh, yeah. But the property is also grazed seasonally, so it can be managed. The cows actually help keep up the plant biodiversity. They munch on the non-native grasses and keep them down so the native flowers can persist. So there's cattle grazing, there's a historical house, and there's fabulous habitat on this property.
That's one thing I like about where conservation has come, or conserving as it were, is finding ways that, you know, being creative and finding ways that that are helpful to the land that may not occur first to people. Right. You know, people might say, what are cattle doing on here? Well, sometimes they have a good role.
Absolutely.
As you just mentioned.
And this is managed grazing. This is not overgrazing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it has to be done right.
Yes.
Okay, I think there's one more on this series of the protected lands. So what are we looking at here?
Here, there's a great view over Woolfolk Reservoir, a place that waterfowl and swans and migrating ducks love to stop at. And this is a beautiful property with oak woodlands and rolling hills and a big source of water for wildlife. It's a little off of Highway 140.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to thank you for sharing these very special places.
Sure.
You know, my viewers may have awakened this morning and not realized that this great work has been done. Now, is this, just briefly, is this part of, there's a goal of the 20 by 20?
Yes.
Can you explain that briefly for everybody?
Sure. We have a vision of protecting 20,000 acres by the year 2020. With more and more people moving to this area, we have sort of a sense of urgency to protect more land. So we're really spreading our communications with landowners and to find people who want to work with us to protect the land they love.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, and you're halfway there, it sounds like.
We
with
are
the
halfway there.
10,000 acres. Well, I want to thank you for helping us through all of this great work that's been done. To keep the work going involves stewardship, and that's what we're going to drill into when we come back. So we'll be back in just a few moments with Adventures in Education. In fact, we'll be right back right after this.
Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
In 2015, I launched a new series on RVTV. Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. Since my first unit was railroads, viewers got to see lots of train videos. Some of the greatest trackside scenery in the world. Today's function is using conjunctions to show a cause-effect relationship. Gladys Knight's Pips used that when they sang, whoop, whoop. 2015 also explored the education scene on Adventures in Education, including hearing from English language learners.
And I think that parents should teach their children Spanish and be able to teach them their native language. It's so important right now to be able to speak both languages.
And how does it feel to be bilingual?
Oh, it feels great.
Thaler is my guest today. She is the Stewardship Director for Southern Oregon Land Conservancy. And you're watching Adventures in Education. I'm your host, John Letts, and just thought you'd want to see a little bit of what Let's Create Productions has been through in the last year. As we're taping this program, this is the first Adventures in Education for 2016, and welcome everybody to the program. We've just seen some of the great work that's been done by a group called Southern Oregon Land Conservancy. My guest is the Stewardship Director, as I mentioned, and this has to do with passing the torch, I guess you could say, to the next generation. So we have some great images of some of the work that's been done. So let's just jump right in there, and we can talk about those. All right?
Sure.
Okay. So let's take a look at this one, and what are we looking at here?
So this is in the Jacksonville Woodlands along Jackson Creek, and this work party of wonderful volunteers is pulling English ivy, an invasive plant, from the forest. So there's no death by ivy of the trees along this riparian area, the stream side, and that the ivy doesn't choke out the understory. So there's native shrubs and flowers. So this is a group of folks out there who want to make a difference and love the Jacksonville Woodlands.
And they must love it to wrestle with those invasive plants.
Yeah, they pull for a good cause.
They do. They pull for a good cause. A good way to put it. Okay, let's see what's next. So we'll be looking at this image right now. So
yeah, so this is a class we've been working with. It's a mixed middle school class at John Muir School, and this is their third year coming out to Orton Todd Woods. The program's called Adopt a Park, and we work with the Ashland Parks and Recreation staff, the middle school students, and me. And they come out four times a year and do stewardship activities at Orton Todd Woods. So they work on the trails, they pull noxious weeds, and they get a lesson, a hands-on lesson every time they come out. Some of these students have been coming out for all of the 3 years, so they know this property very well. It's a very charming class to work with, too, because as we're walking along the trails, there's one young man who plays the ukulele, and we sing songs on our way to our work.
That's charming. That's downright charming. Well, I guess working year after year, they probably have some sense of ownership of this area.
They do, and I must say, working with adult volunteers and college students, no one works as hard as these 7th and 8th graders.
Oh, way to go, 7th and 8th graders. Okay, so let's see what's next.
For instance, see how hard. Here's some more
This is a
students.
great one.
It was a very wet and muddy day, and these students came back from their task of digging out a non-native tree from the forest, and there might have been a little mud throwing involved.
Well, it's always fun when you're working with kids, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's see what's next.
And to recognize that they've adopted this park, there's a couple signs up at Orts and Todd Woods
Okay.
that they've adopted the trail.
That's an area, I got the privilege of spending a lot of time. I think it's Thompson Creek that goes close to that area.
Clay Creek.
Clay Creek, yeah. And gosh, I spent lots of time hiking around up there. It's a beautiful area.
Oh, yeah.
So let's see what's next.
This is a picture from a program we call Loving the Land. It's been going on for over 10 years. It's also Orts and Todd Woods, which is a protected park up above Ashland. Sweet little woods, and we often just call it the woods. And 4th and 5th graders come
Oh,
to...
4th and 5th graders.
Yeah.
So any particular school?
We often have students from Ashland, Talent, Phoenix, and Medford.
I see.
And
Great.
usually about 250 to 300 students go through every spring.
Wow, that's quite a number of people being affected.
Yeah, and you know, many of these students say they've never been in the woods, that they've never walked on a trail. And you know, one of our primary goals is we want students to feel safe and loved in the natural world.
Sure.
They're not going to be interested in conservation when they're older if they don't feel safe. So our main goal is for them to have a good time in the woods.
Sure.
And we want them to meet their neighbors, get to know the really tall ponderosa pines and the very small aquatic insects in the creek, and know specific things about their backyard. We also want them to do science inquiry, hands-on science inquiry.
And that goes right along with the state standards, you know,
Absolutely.
of what they need to know.
Yes.
Well, I tell you, of all the things, you know, and I know that science education is extremely important and has been underserved in general,
Right.
with a lot of more emphasis on reading in the last decade, let's say. But that whole affective part you're talking about, that connection with nature that's not just any tree, that's the tree, you know, the ponderosa pine. That is so important to be handing down to this generation,
I agree.
next generation. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one.
Here is one of our very talented volunteers. He's actually talking about the trees in the woods. And we're lucky to have a lot of talented teachers, including Clayton depicted
Clayton
here.
Gillette, yeah. I looked at that and said, I think that's Clayton, and it is. Okay, so let's see the next one.
So not only do the students have time for hands-on exploration, finding out about the woods, but they also have time for reflection. So they draw and write about their experiences in the woods.
And I think, you know, along with the lines of that, one of the things that I found is so important is having kids learn to slow down and listen when they're in nature. Because so much of their life sometimes is on such a fast speed, you know,
Right.
and to really observe both with their eyes and their ears. So we have a new image up, or we will have a new image up, and there it is.
Oh, there's Clayton being captivating again. The students rotate through 3 stations, and one of them is called rock hounds. And so they learn about the different types of rocks, but then they find out about the specific spot on Clay Creek is the contact between the old granitic Mount Ashland Pluton and a former inland sea, sometimes called the Hornbrook Formation. And we have them find that contact where you go upstream, you only find granitic rocks, but then there's a point where you start seeing sandstone and mudstones from this former sea. And then they look for fossils that fell down to the bottom of the sea about 70 million years ago. So they're learning stuff, and then they're applying it to this actual place that has its own stories.
Talk about hands-on learning.
Yeah.
Let's see the next one.
Oh, well, we also work with some older students. Here's actually a job council crew. We were doing some work in the Williams Creek Reserve, and we also were having fun.
It looks like it, and a sense of accomplishment, I would say.
Right. We conquered the Himalayan blackberry.
Okay, so let's take a look at the next one.
And actually here are some Cub Scouts who
I love that picture,
I
by
do
the way.
too. And they had been pulling star thistle along the greenway up above Eagle Mill Farm in Ashland. And they were very proud of themselves, as they should have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see what's next.
We also have community hikes for families and adults. And we go to some properties that sometimes you don't have access to. So here is a tour of Eagle Mill Farm. And here Ron Roth is talking about his special pruning method for his grapevines.
Oh, okay. We have just a little bit more time, so we're going to stop on this.
Sure.
And I'm just going to have you respond to, you're obviously very enthused about this work, and you really know what you're doing, I can tell that. What kind of things got you interested in doing this kind of work, and what gets you out of bed in the morning to do this important work?
Well, I guess number one is I want us to have natural areas to go to. I know that natural areas can bring much solace and peace to us in this kind of crazy modern world. So I think that is my number one motivation. And like most people, a place that I grew up where I looked for Bigfoot in the Sherwood Forest in Oregon is altered and gone. The wetland's gone, the forest is gone, the rock walls that gray foxes walked on, they're all gone. And when these places disappear, a little piece of you disappears.
Oh, absolutely.
So that really motivates me. And then also I just want people to be connected to place, local places.
And that centers a person real well. Where can people get in touch with the organization, Southern Oregon Land Conservancy, or with you?
Well, you're welcome to email me directly or go to our website. You're welcome to sign up for our newsletters or our e-news to find out about our events. We have other community events that are not just hiking. We'd love for you to join in our activities, but mostly what we want is we want you to take a kid outside and take yourself outside and find some peace and find some beauty and maybe learn the names of some of those plants and animals that you pass by and build that connection to place to enrich your life.
And I think there's nothing that I could add to that. That sounds like really good advice. Christy, thank you so much for being on Adventures in Education today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Now, for our viewers, you can watch this program or download it by going to archive.org/details/RogueTV. You can also see this program twice weekly on channel 15 if you're on the Ashland Home Network, or anywhere else in Southern Oregon with a charter cable. You can see it on channel 182. And that's all for today's program. Join us next time for Adventures in Education. I'm John Letts.